Arrogance is a big problem. It's a really big problem. But before I go into why it's such a big problem, I'm going to talk about an incident that happened a few weeks ago that involved a monastic here and some wildlife. So one of the monastics here likes to travel in the dark without a flashlight. And we had, I think it was either a puja or something upstairs, maybe a teaching ended. And the monastic went downstairs. If you've been here, you know what I'm talking about. So we're upstairs right now, and you go downstairs to get out of the building. And she went out the door without a flashlight and startled a skunk. So there is no mistaking the smell of a skunk. There's no mistaking it. And most of the time, I think that there's no mistaking arrogance. It's kind of like the same thing. You know, it's like a bad smell. And I don't know about you, but this shows and I'm not trying to be the worst right now, but this is showing my poor quality practice. I want to get away from the smell of a skunk, and I want to get away from the person that I'm perceiving to be arrogant. So this past season with having this skunk encounter, which we lived with for a number of days. So that nun got nailed squarely. And then she went into Gotami house with her shoes, of course, and the mat was covered with skunk smell, and we had that with us. So then I wondered, well, do skunks like their own smell? You know, do they mind? So apparently the experts online say that skunks really don't like the smell of their scent. But then I want to know, how do they know? How do these experts know that? How many skunks did they interview? Who speaks skunk speak? How do they know? So I don't know about that one. But the thing that is you can't argue with is that they have done research that when skunks release this smell, it all comes out of their scent glands, and then they're depleted for 7 to 10 days. They have no more skunk smell to release. And that makes these little creatures helpless, because this is their number one, this is their only line of defense. I mean, they also stand up on their back legs, but they're not very big. You know, who are they going to scare? They'll scare us because we know what a skunk looks like. But for 7 to 10 days, they're helpless. Sadly, for us human beings, we have no end to those seeds of arrogance that are in our mind stream. We don't have to wait for 7 to 10 days to reload and charge and let fly with more arrogance. We can just wait for the causes and conditions to come together. That's unfortunate. So, fortunately, the Buddha's teachings, there's plenty of advice on how to deal with this mental state of arrogance. And today I'm going to refer to some teachings from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland from the book Practical Ethics and Profound Emptiness, a commentary by Khenpo Jampa Tekjog and edited by Venerable Children. And you can find the teaching series on our YouTube website. You'll have to look for Nagarjuna's Precious Garland. Don't look for the title of the book. You'll be confused and you'll be looking for it for hours like I was. It's so cool that Venerable Children taught from the book for over 2 years. There's 108 teachings. So I would say get on it right now. I'm going to be referring from chapter 12, which addresses abandoning afflictions and cultivating goodness. So in this chapter, Nagarjuna points out 57 defects in attitude and behavior that we need to diminish as much as possible and then to eventually forsake. And so in verse 406, he gets right to it. And this verse says the following: being arrogant is being conceited. To be heedless is not to apply oneself to virtue. Pride is of 7 kinds. I will now explain each of them. So the definition of arrogance is conceit, or an inflated sense of self based on our possessions, our good health, our wealth, our youth, our social standing, learning, and so forth. And in the previous talk, we went and identified more things that we can be arrogant about. We can be arrogant about anything. I thought I'd spend a little bit of time right now looking at the arrogance of youth. So has anyone in this room escaped this one? I think it's pretty hard to escape this one, because when we're younger and our body is vital and, attractive and strong, we can ride on that for a certain period of time, but it's pretty fleeting. Sorry to tell you if you're in your 20s. This is probably the most unstable one of any of them that we can be arrogant about, because in no time, someone else who's younger than you will show up. In fact, we had a guest here once who said very honestly, and he was the youngest one here at the time, he said, "I hate it when younger people come here. I just hate it." He was being honest. So I'll share a time that is so embarrassing to relate, but it's a clear example of being arrogant because of my youth and my education at that point. And it was when I first started teaching and I joined this school. I was right out of university. I'd finished at Christmas time, and I got a job in January, and I joined a staff that had been handpicked a few years earlier by this well-known principal. So the handpicked staff was a group of people who were very experienced teachers. They were all way older than me, at least 7 years. But they were a lot older than me and very experienced. Well, I came in the first week of school, right? New person, the youngest person on staff. Just out of university, I thought, I've got the most current information in my head. I'm pretty hot stuff here, right? Well, honestly, it took about an hour in the classroom that day where I saw that all of my training was absolutely useless. And I was being run over by kids in grade 3. There was one class, it was a combination of grade 2 and grade 3 kids. I am not exaggerating. I have peers that can back this up. They ate up and spat out 3 different teachers from September to December. Spat them out. We're talking 7 and 8-year-olds. So in no time, I saw that I was the stupidest one in the school, and that all of these people who were older than I was, had so much wisdom, so much experience. I leaned on them like crazy. It was the only way I made it through that year. I was on the verge of quitting many times. It was hard. It was really hard. But they knew how to connect with the kids. They knew how to deal with the problems. They knew how to talk to the teacher. They talked to the parents. And I trailed them like crazy. It was a very humbling experience. And it's so embarrassing to think about those moments when I thought I was such a hotshot. Oh, God. So you might think of times where you were feeling pretty puffed up about your body, your attractiveness, your mental acuity, how you were number one wherever you are, and how, it just doesn't last. So what? Like, who cares? That's not important. So that's arrogance. And then Nagarjuna identifies in this whole package, aiming our mind at arrogance. He talks about heedlessness, which is negligence and the lack of conscientiousness that wants to act in an unrestrained way without creating virtue or guarding the mind from bad activities. So this is the mind that you're going to say and do what you want. I could care less. I don't care if it hurts your feelings. And so in that mental state, then there's non-integrity, there's lack of consideration for others, and those all just work to keep us caught in this very negative place. And I think a perfect example of this now that we're seeing in exploding forms is on social media, where people can anonymously say whatever they want, or they're not anonymous, they're known. They're very famous, in fact, they're well known, they're household names, and they say whatever they want, and it's mean, it's cruel, and it's fabricated. It's lies. And this is the mental state of heedlessness that goes in with arrogance. And then you might think, well, I don't do that. I don't do those things. Well, what about those of us who have ever gone on a Rate My Doctor site or Rate My Professor site? Now, Rate My Professor didn't exist when I was going to school, but I've looked at some over the years. And what I've seen on these rate my professor places is absolutely atrocious. Same with rate my doctors. You can ruin people's careers by doing this, and you can be anonymous. And people then take some kind of distorted pleasure in trashing someone. And it all falls back to this mind of arrogance. And then Nagarjuna goes on to identify 7 types of pride, or arrogance, or conceit. So verse 407 says, concerning these, the first is called pride. It is where one thinks of oneself as even inferior to the inferior, equal to the equal, or greater than or equal to the inferior. So this first type of pride or conceit or arrogance has 3 branches. And the first one is thinking that we're inferior to the inferior. I'm the worst of the worst. Has anyone ever had that thought? So it's kind of hard to take this medicine because this is a sense of perverse pride. It is a form of conceit. And it feeds into our low self-esteem. And in thinking this way, if you really think about it carefully, it makes us feel, even in this weird way, that we're special and noteworthy. If we're the worst of the worst of the worst, that makes me special. And so we might even think, I have the most uncontrolled mind in this room right now. That makes me better than you. Or we can be proud of how depraved and degenerate we are, still thinking that we're special or noteworthy. And it's this mind of comparing ourselves to others, even in this way. So if I can't be the best, and I'm not happy with being in the middle, I'm going to be the worst. Because if I'm the worst, I don't have to do anything anymore. There's no expectations. Everyone knows I'm going to be a creep. They won't invite me to help with dishes. So, of course, then we think, well, that's true only of terrorist groups and of, certain kind of gangs, that kind of thinking. I don't do that. Well, again, we go look at the examples of heedlessness on social media. I think we can probably find this one in ourselves at some point, maybe not anymore. Then the second one is feeling equals the equal, and this is the mind that is always competing. And I think we've also had this experience too. I mean, if you've gone to school, you've had this experience. And I remember the first time I was very aware of this was when I was in grade 5. And I really did like this teacher. She was an experienced person, and she told really good stories, but she had this terrible technique of seating us in the room according to how we did on test scores. This is grade 5. You're about, 10, 11 years old in grade 5? And so, I would look around and everyone was terrified of the day that we would hear it. She didn't do it in every class. I mean, there would be this constant desk arranging every class, right? But the times it did happen, we'd have to rearrange our chairs. We saw who number 1 was. I was never number 1. But then I'd look around at the rest of the group, and everyone who had a score less than me was on that side of the room. And then I'd look at the kids on the other far end row. They had the worst scores, and then the kid at the very back in the corner. And so how do you feel if you're in that position, in that last place desk, time after time? And then how about the kids in the front row? The row where you've got the top scores. And even at age 10, I thought, this is wrong. This is not very nice. And I hated it, because I hated looking over and seeing how the rest of the kids looked and how they were on the playground at recess, and how again and again that year they got that hammered in that they were either not at the top, but they're certainly at the bottom. So I have to admit, the few times I was in that row that was in the top achiever row, because I'm doing something pretty good here initially, but that didn't last for long, looking at the faces of my friends. So the third one is this idea of feeling greater than or equal to the inferior. And this is comparing ourselves to people that we think are degenerate. We're better than those people, those prejudiced people out there that we read about, that we hear about, those bigots. We're better than them, right? I wouldn't do that. But let's take another close look. So, how am I thinking when I see photos or read about people who are not wearing masks and they're not social distancing? And is there a little moment of pride that creeps into my mind when I think to myself, I wouldn't do that. How could they? What's wrong with those people? And the minute I hear myself saying what's wrong with my people, that's a pretty big signal that I've got some arrogance flying around in there. So arrogance is a problem for everybody. It's especially a problem for a spiritual practitioner. And Khencher Jampa Tegchog in the commentary gives us some words of advice. He says this: while you read about these 57 faults in the ensuing verses, examine your mind and behavior and make many examples of how these faults manifest in you. Then contemplate the various antidotes to them so that when they arise, you can apply them and thus prevent these faults from taking control of your mind. So we'll take a look at the other 6 next time. And let's follow the sage advice of Khencher Jampa Tegchog.